The whistle shrieked like a hunting hawk slicing through the misty dawn. Boots pounded the frozen gravel. Orders barked. And in the middle of the chaos, a single man stepped down from a battered pickup, the fog swallowing him like a curtain drawn for a show about to begin. Jack Carter didn't look like the kind of recruit anyone expected at Fort Darien's elite Joint Forces boot camp. His olive green marine jacket was worn to threads, the seams rubbed pale by years of weather and war. An old duffel bag slung over his broad shoulder bore the faded stencil of a unit long retired. His dark jeans were patched at one knee, and his boots carried the scars of 100 muddy miles. A handful of young recruits, 20-somethings in spotless fatigues, stopped mid-jog to gawk. One let out a low whistle. "Yo, Grandpa," a lanky kid with a shaved head called. "Wrong movie set? Senior center's that way." Laughter erupted like gunfire. Jack paused his back, straightening almost imperceptibly. He adjusted the strap of the duffel, said nothing, and started toward the registration tent. The air smelled of wet earth and steel. He moved with the calm of a man who had marched through far worse mornings. Another voice, sharper, joined the jeers. "What's the deal? Old man midlife crisis. Trying to relive the glory days." More laughter. But the mockery dimmed as quickly as it rose. For a split second, when Jack bent to set down his bag, the back of his jacket lifted, and the edge of something black and silver shimmered against the light ink, cut into skin, not paint, curved like a shadowed wing. Wasn't fully visible, but enough to stir an uneasy silence. A shape of a dark arrow tip. Before anyone could ask, the piercing call of the morning bugle rolled over the parade ground. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age, your past, or simply because you choose quiet strength over loud words, stay with Jack. His story carries the kind of turn that changes how we see resilience, family, and honor. If this opening stirs something in you, tap the heart, or share your thoughts below. It helps more people discover stories that remind us what real courage looks like. Sergeant Paul Hargrove's voice thundered across the yard. "Fall in, recruits. Double line, let's move." The new arrivals scrambled into formation. Jack joined the second row, his height and calm drawing sidelong looks from the men around him. His eyes, steel gray flecked with gold, scanned the compound. Training fields stretched like a battlefield prepared for war, obstacle courses, glistening with dew, the smell of oil and gunmetal in the air. Inside the mess hall, breakfast was swift and loud. Metal trays clattered. Conversations buzzed about grueling tests and weekend passes. At the far end, Jack sat alone, spooning oatmeal without hurry. The same young men who had mocked him earlier, Lance and his buddies, clustered nearby. "Bet he can't even run the mile without a walker." Lance sneered loud enough for Jack to hear. The group cackled. Jack lifted his gaze just once. There was no flash of anger, only a steady, unreadable calm. He returned to his oatmeal as if the noise belonged to another world. Across the room, a woman in crisp command blues entered with the force of a cold front. Conversations died mid-sentence. Commander Elena Graves, tall, composed, a streak of silver, threading her black hair, carried authority like a drawn blade. Her eyes swept the room with soldier's precision, then briefly landed on Jack. For a heartbeat, something flickered, a question or a memory. But she moved on expression unreadable. By mid-morning, the recruits assembled on the obstacle field. The course smelled of mud and iron. Wooden walls loomed, ropes swung like pendulums, and a cold drizzle began to fall. Sergeant Hargrove barked, "You will climb, you will crawl, you will carry. You will not stop until I say so." The young men lunged forward. Jack moved last, his pace deliberate. Where others muscled up the wall and scrambled, he chose angles and holds with surgical efficiency. His boots found purchase where others slipped. His breathing stayed steady. When a recruit ahead of him lost footing, Jack's hand shot out, steadying the kid before he fell. He never broke stride. From the sidelines, two instructors exchanged quiet glances. "Who's that one?" asked. "Name's Carter. Civilian re-up. Paperwork says logistics." The first instructor snorted. "Logistics, my foot. Nobody climbs like that." Meanwhile, Lance strained to keep up. Sweat streaked his brow, pride fueling every jerk of muscle. When he landed beside Jack at the rope tower, he spat. "Don't think you'll show me up, old man." Jack simply adjusted his grip and ascended. No reply. By the time the sun bled orange over the barracks, Jack's body bore the ache of hard labor. But his movements remained precise, unhurried. Later in the quiet of the sleeping quarters, he sat on his bunk with a small photograph in his hands. Ellie's 7-year-old hair in a crooked braid beamed at the camera with the missing front tooth she'd been so proud of. He opened a worn notebook and began to write, his pen steady, despite the tremor of fatigue. "Ellie girl today," the young ones laughed. "That's okay. We don't rise by outshouting, we rise by outlasting. Remember what I told you, kindness is stronger than pride. Courage is quieter than noise." He closed the notebook, placed it beneath the pillow, and whispered a promise only the dark could hear. "I'll make you proud, kiddo, whatever it takes." Outside, the night wind rattled the flagpoles. Somewhere beyond the barracks, a commander with a streak of silver hair lingered by her office window. Eyes narrowed toward the training field, as if a half-forgotten shadow had returned to life. She couldn't yet name why the quiet man in the frayed jacket unsettled her, but the image of that dark, arrow-shaped tattoo flashing under the mist refused to leave her mind. And so the first day closed, the silence between them, charged with a history neither had spoken aloud. The laughter of the morning already felt like something from a different world, a prologue to a revelation waiting just beyond the next dawn. The morning bugle wailed long before first light, vibrating through the thin metal walls of the barracks. Jack Carter woke with the efficiency of muscle memory. One motion, and he was sitting upright, boots on laces tight. Around him, the younger recruits stirred like startled birds, grumbling half asleep, fumbling with fatigues, still stiff from the factory. The air smelled of damp wool and yesterday's sweat. Outside, the parade ground lay under a low ceiling of clouds, moonlight sharpening every edge of frost on the gravel. Jack breathed it in, steady and slow, as if drawing strength from the cold. "Rise and shine, Grandpa," someone muttered through a yawn. Laughter followed from the bunks at the far wall. Lance's voice, too sharp for this hour, cut through like a dull blade. Jack said nothing. He pulled on his jacket, the same olive-green marine coat that had drawn so many stares yesterday, and slipped the worn photo of Ellie into the inner pocket. For a moment his thumb rested on the child's smiling face. Then he rose and fell in with the line filing toward the mess hall. The hall buzzed with nervous chatter. Tin trays clanged. The smell of coffee tried to disguise the scent of boiled eggs and damp socks. Jack took a seat at the far end of a long table, the same corner he had chosen the day before. Lance and two buddies, Vince and Rourke, occupied the center like roosters in a yard. Their voices carried easily. "Bet he creaks when he does push-ups," Vince said loud enough for every ear. Rourke snickered. "Probably has a doctor's note in that duffel bag. For arthritis." More laughter. Jack cut into his oatmeal with the patience of a man measuring time differently. He neither hurried nor slowed. His silence drew more attention than any retort might have. The hall's side door opened with a gust of cold air. Commander Elena Graves entered in full uniform blues, a white folder under her arm. Her presence pulled the noise down to a whisper. Eyes followed her as she crossed the room with long, confident strides. Her gaze brushed Jack again, quick assessing. There it was, that strange flicker, as though some file in her mind had just been disturbed. She moved on without a word, but the weight of that glance lingered like a quiet order. By the time the recruits assembled on the training field, a thin drizzle slicked every surface. Sergeant Hargrove, his cap pulled low, barked the day's agenda. Today we test endurance. 3-mile run obstacle course, immediate weapons breakdown. You will work until you forget how to complain. A low groan traveled through the ranks. The run began with the crack of a starter pistol. Young men surged forward like a released tide. Jack held back, pacing himself, with the calm calculation of a man who had once run with 70 pounds of gear under desert sun. His breathing stayed, even his stride long and unhurried. Within the first mile, recruits began to stagger. Mud splashed their calves, lungs burned. Lance tried to maintain his lead, but kept glancing back at Jack, who without hurry closed the distance. "Come on, old man," Lance taunted, forcing a grin through ragged breaths. Jack neither answered nor altered pace. One by one, the gap shrank until he moved alongside the younger man, their boots striking the ground in an odd unison. Jack's eyes stayed forward, his breath steady, as if the ground itself had chosen to meet him halfway. By the final lap, he quietly passed Lance, not with a sprint, but with the same patient rhythm he'd begun with. When the finish whistle blew, Jack was among the first 5 to cross. Not a single gasp left his chest. Sergeant Hargrove scribbled something on his clipboard, brow furrowed. Mud had thickened into slick patches by the time they reached the wall climb. Rope ladders swung like wet vines, and wooden barriers gleamed with drizzle. Jack waited for his turn, studying the course like a chessboard. When he moved, he wasted no motion. Where others flung themselves upward and slipped back down, he mapped each grip and foothold, conserving strength. At the balance beams, he crossed, as if walking a quiet forest trail. Halfway through, a recruit ahead of him lost balance and flailed toward the mud. Jack's hand shot out, catching the back of the man's collar and steadying him without breaking stride. "Thanks," the young soldier gasped. Jack simply nodded and moved on. On the sidelines, 2 instructors exchanged a look. Logistics one murmured. The other shook his head. Not a chance. Humiliation simmered behind Lance's forced grin. By midday, the drizzle had thickened into cold rain, and tempers frayed with fatigue. When the group moved to weapons breakdown in the armory, Lance's patience snapped. As they stripped and reassembled rifles, Jack's hands moved with quiet precision. Pins, bolts, springs, all clicked into place with a rhythm like remembered music. His table was spotless, while others still wrestled with stubborn parts. Lance slammed his rifle down the clang-drawing stairs. "You think you're better than us, huh? Too good to even talk." Jack looked up calm. "Not better. Just here for the same test as you." The even tone only fed the younger man's frustration. He leaned closer, voice low but sharp. "Or maybe you're hiding something. Maybe that tattoo means you're some washed-up hero who can't let go." The room stilled. Even the drip of rain from the roof seemed to pause. Jack's gray eyes met his steady as stone. "Maybe it means I know when to keep quiet." Something in that quiet answer unsettled Lance more than any shout could have. He backed away with a muttered curse. Night brought a damp chill that settled deep in bone. Jack returned to his bunk muscles tired, but mind alert. He opened his notebook under the faint glow of a reading light. "Ellie girl," he wrote today, "I remembered why silence matters. It's not weakness. It's space for the right words to grow." He paused, letting the pen hover. Memories flickered desert nights under foreign stars, the soft cry of a baby's in a house that now stood empty, the last promise to a woman he loved and lost. Across the barracks, Lance whispered something to his friends and laughed without mirth. Jack heard, but didn't react. Instead, he folded the photograph of Ellie inside the journal and placed it beneath his pillow. Through the narrow window, he could see the commander's office across the courtyard. A single light burned late. Elena Graves stood silhouetted, one hand on the glass, as if trying to remember where she had seen a dark arrow wrapped in shadow before. Somewhere between the whisper of rain and the beating of his heart, Jack felt the past edging closer, like a tide that could no longer be held back. Tomorrow, he knew, would test more than his muscles. It would test the very silence he had spent years perfecting. The third morning at Fort Darien broke beneath a low pewter sky, the air heavy with the smell of wet earth and iron. The bugle's cry pierced the barracks at 500 sharp. Jack Carter was already awake, seated on the edge of his bunk, with his boots laced, listening to the familiar rhythm of young soldiers jolting into motion. A cough, a clatter of metal lockers, muffled curses, it all folded into the background hum of a life he had once known like his own heartbeat. Yet here, he was not as a Marine on active duty, but as a quiet father chasing a private mission only he and his little girl understood. He reached into the inner pocket of his olive green jacket and touched the worn photograph of Ellie. The corners were soft from countless nights of similar gestures. A quick breath, then he stood, movements precise, economical. Behind him, Lance grumbled loud enough for half the room to hear. Still, here, old man, thought you'd limp back to civilian life by now. Jack said nothing. Silence, he knew, had a way of echoing louder than a shout. Outside, cold fog clung to the parade ground. Sergeant Hargrove Cap, tilted low against the drizzle, paced like a restless wolf. Today he barked. We see who can keep going when the body wants to quit. Endurance circuit. Full kit. No excuses. The recruits shouldered packs stuffed with sandbags, rifles slung over their backs. The air smelled of damp canvas and gun oil. At Hargrove's signal, they broke into a steady jog around the perimeter trail, a 5-mile loop through mud gravel and rain-slicked forest floor. Within minutes, the first groans began. Mud sucked at boots, turning each step into a slow-motion struggle. Lance and his buddies pushed to the front, their pride as visible as their effort. Jack settled into the middle of the pack, neither chasing nor lagging, every movement tuned to efficiency. 1 mile in the drizzle, thickened to cold rain. Mud splashed higher, spattering fatigues and faces. A younger recruit lost footing on a steep incline. Jack's hand shot out, steadying the kid without breaking stride. Careful, he said quietly, the single word carrying more weight than a lecture. The recruit nodded, breathless. By mile 3 more fell behind lungs, heaving. Lance kept glancing back, sweat streaming despite the cold disbelief shadowing his face, as the older man maintained an unbroken rhythm. When they reached the finish, Jack crossed not first, but with the steadiness of someone who could have kept going indefinitely. He dropped his pack, shoulders square, breathing even. Sergeant Hargrove made a small mark on his clipboard, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. No respite followed. The recruits moved directly to weapons drills, disassembly, cleaning, reassembly, all against the clock. Rain drummed on the tin roof of the armory like impatient fingers. Jack handled the rifle with the quiet familiarity of a man who had done this under desert moons and jungle dawns. Bolt carrier springs, each piece slid into place, in a choreography his hands remembered without thought. Beside him, Lance struggled to keep pace, parts clattering. "What are you, some kind of machine?" he muttered. Jack offered the faintest shrug. "Just practiced." The instructor timed the assembly and let out a low whistle. "Carter, 2 minutes 15 seconds. That's exceptional." Several heads turned. A few murmurs rippled through the room. The silence that followed was different from the mocking hush of earlier days. This one held a question. Who is he really? Lunch brought a brief lull. Recruits slumped over trays of soup and bread, their bodies buzzing with exhaustion. Jack sat alone, as always, methodically eating, while rain streaked the mess hall windows. Commander Elena Graves entered halfway through the blue of her uniform, a calm note against the gray day. Her gaze found Jack almost instantly. For a heartbeat, She lingered the faint crease between her brows, deepening as if memory were teasing the edge of recognition. Then she moved on, but not before Jack felt the strange electricity of someone silently connecting dots. After lunch, the circuit shifted indoors to the combat gym mats, slick from humidity. Here, agility mattered as much as strength. Hargrove barked instructions for pairs to spar in rotating drills. Jack faced a broad-shouldered recruit named Meyer for the first round. The younger man lunged fast, confident. Jack sidestepped with economical grace, using angles rather than brute force. Within seconds, Meyer was on the mat, staring up in surprise. Another round, another takedown. Jack offered a hand to help Meyer up each time, no triumph in his eyes, only steady respect. When Lance's turn came, his smile was thin. Finally, he said, cracking his neck, "Let's see what Grandpa's hiding." The room sharpened with anticipation. But even in sparring, Jack's movements were patient, almost surgical. He absorbed Lance's first charge, shifted weight, and in a single fluid motion pivoted to send the younger man off balance without harm. Lance hit the mat with a frustrated grunt. Gasps followed. Hargrove's eyebrows rose. Again the sergeant ordered. Again Lance lunged. Again he found air where Jack's body had been. After the third fall, Hargrove called it. Enough. "Carter, that's textbook." For the first time, a trace of reluctant admiration edged the sergeant's voice. Night came with the hush of steady rain. The barrack smelled of wet boots and tired muscle. Jack sat at his bunk, a single dim lamp casting long shadows. He opened his small notebook, the paper wrinkled from past dampness. The photograph of Ellie waited inside, smiling with that stubborn missing tooth. "Ellie girl," he wrote today, "I learned that patience is a weapon. Others rush, we measure. Others shout, we listen. That's how we build strength that lasts longer than noise." He paused, listening to the rain. The memory of his late wife's voice rose unbidden, soft, steady the way she had once told him to teach their daughter that quiet was not weakness, but wisdom. Across the room, Lance's laughter rang thin and forced. The day's defeats had left cracks in his bravado. Jack caught a fleeting glance from one of Lance's friends. No mockery, now just a cautious respect. Through the window, he noticed the faint glow of the commander's office again. Elena Graves stood silhouetted, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the dark courtyard. Even from this distance, he sensed the intensity of her thoughts, as though she were pulling at a thread woven years ago. Jack closed his notebook, slid it beneath his pillow, and lay back. The rhythm of rain and distant thunder lulled the barracks toward sleep. But in the quiet of his own mind, he could feel the invisible tide of recognition rising a past he had tried to fold away like an old map, now slowly unfolding. Tomorrow would bring harder drills and sharper questions. And somewhere inside the silence, he knew waited the moment when the truth on his back, the black eagle and silver arrow of a unit, long believed gone, would no longer stay hidden. The rain finally broke overnight, leaving the dawn air sharp and clean. When the bugle pierced the silence at 500, Jack Carter was already sitting upright, boots-laced hands resting calmly on his knees. Around him, the younger recruits stirred with groggy protests. The smell of drying boots and cold steel clung to the barracks. Today's schedule posted by the door promised a punishing climb across the ridge trail, followed by endurance drills. Jack slid the photograph of Ellie back into the safe pocket of his olive jacket and rose without a sound. The simple act of standing seemed to carry the quiet discipline of someone who had been rising before dawn, long before these men were born. Outside, mist threaded through the pine trees like a living veil. The recruits moved in a shivering cluster toward the trailhead packs, strapped with extra weight. Sergeant Hargrove's voice cut through the crisp air. 5 miles of incline. No breaks until I say, "You'll learn who you are on this trail." The climb began at a steady march, boots crunching over loose rock and damp earth. Within minutes, the mist turned to a soft drizzle, beating on helmets and eyelashes. The slope demanded breath and patience. Jack kept a measured rhythm, conserving energy. His eyes traced each foothold, noting slick roots and hidden stones. He remembered long desert patrols, where a single misstep meant an ambush. His body responded, as if those years were yesterday, not a lifetime ago. Behind him, Lance's complaints rose with the fog. "What's next? Grandpa's going to teach us yoga." Vince chuckled, but the sound lacked yesterday's bravado. They were learning how hard it was to mock someone who never took the bait. By the final stretch, many recruits were gasping, shoulders slumped under wet packs. Jack's breathing stayed even. When one young soldier slipped and his ankle twisted, Jack stopped without hesitation, bracing the soldier's arm until he could rejoin the group. Sergeant Hargrove's eyes lingered on Jack as he recorded names and times. There was something in that look, an unspoken acknowledgement that hadn't been there 3 days ago. After the climb, the mess hall smelled of strong coffee and damp canvas. Jack sat at his usual corner table, carefully spooning oatmeal steam rising in faint spirals. The chatter of younger recruits washed over him. A shadow fell across the table. "Mind if I sit?" Jack looked up. A woman in fatigue's dark hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun held a tray with the confidence of someone used to making her own decisions. Her name tag read, "Lopez." "Free country," Jack said mildly, gesturing to the seat across from him. Maria Lopez sat, her movements spare and deliberate. She looked early 30s, a face strong, yet softened by something Jack recognized immediately. Loss carried with quiet dignity. "They give you a hard time?" she asked, stirring her coffee. "Nothing worth remembering," Jack replied. She studied him for a moment, eyes sharp but kind. Most people would have snapped back, or snapped, period. Jack offered a faint smile. "Patience isn't weakness, it's training." Maria's gaze flicked toward Lance and his friends across the room. "They don't know the first thing about patience. My husband, he used to say the loudest guy in the room is usually the weakest." The mention of a husband hung in the air. Jack inclined his head gently, an unspoken condolence. "Afghanistan?" Maria added, answering the question he hadn't asked. "IED. I stayed in because I wanted to finish what we started, helping people who can't help themselves. But some days..." She let the thought trail off. Jack understood that unfinished sentence better than words could carry. "Some days feel heavier than the pack," he said quietly. Her eyes softened. "Exactly." They ate in companionable silence for a few moments, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but shared. Before rising, Maria reached into her pocket and slid a small bottle of water across the table. "For the afternoon drills. You'll need it." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You too." She allowed a quick smile. "I'll manage." When she left, Jack found himself strangely grateful. It had been a long time since someone had offered him something with no strings attached. The sun broke through by midday, turning the training ground into a steaming patchwork of mud and light. The recruits lined up for circuit training burpees, sprints, rope climbs. The heat pressed like a weight. Jack's muscles remembered the rhythm of endurance. Every movement was efficient, nothing wasted. When others lunged with raw strength, he shifted with the economy of a seasoned fighter. From the sidelines, instructors exchanged low remarks. "That's not beginner form," one muttered. "No," another agreed. "That's years of something else." Lance tried to provoke him again, muttering jabs during sprints, but his voice lacked bite. The sight of Jack's unbroken focus, the way he seemed to glide through exhaustion, had begun to erode the foundation of mockery. By the end of the drill, the younger men collapsed onto the grass chests, heaving. Jack crouched to retie a lace, his breathing steady, as though he had merely walked a quiet trail. Evening brought a soft orange light, and the smell of pine warmed by the day. Jack sat outside the barracks on a wooden step, letting the last warmth of sunlight soak into his shoulders. Footsteps approached. "You always this early for everything," Maria's voice carried a lightness absent that morning. "Old habits," Jack said. She lowered herself onto the step beside him, handing over another small bottle of water. "For tomorrow," she explained. For a while they watched the sky bleed into dusk. A hawk wheeled silently over the far ridge. "You've been through a lot," she said finally. "I can tell. Not just from how you move, but how you wait." Jack's eyes remained on the horizon. "Waiting teaches you what's worth moving for." Maria nodded, the words settling between them. "You've got someone waiting for you, don't you?" "Ellie," Jack said, and the single name carried an entire world. Maria smiled softly. "She's lucky. Most kids never know a father who shows up with that kind of strength." Jack swallowed a sudden tightness in his throat. "I promised her, Mom, I'd raise her to know that quiet is a kind of courage, that you can be strong without shouting." Maria's eyes shone in the fading light. "Then you're already winning the hardest mission." They sat until the first stars emerged, the silence between them easy, as if they'd both found a pocket of calm the world couldn't reach. Later, back in the barracks, Jack opened his small notebook. The paper smelled faintly of pine and rain. "Ellie girl," he wrote today, "someone showed kindness when she didn't have to. Remember, strength isn't only in holding steady, it's in reaching out when you see someone standing alone. That's how we keep the world gentle." He placed the photograph back inside and lay down, listening to the quiet breathing of the barracks. Through the narrow window, he caught a glimpse of the command office across the yard. Commander Elena Graves stood motionless, silhouetted against a lamp's glow. She seemed to be staring not at the courtyard, but inward, as if an old memory had come knocking and refused to leave. Jack exhaled slowly. Tomorrow would bring harder tests, and with them, perhaps the first crack in the wall of silence he had built around his past. But tonight, he let the simple gift of an unexpected ally settle in his chest, like a promise kept. The fourth day of training dawned dry but heavy with humidity. A thin veil of clouds dulled the sun, and the air carried the smell of pine needles warmed overnight. Jack Carter woke, as always, before the bugle, sitting motionless for a long minute on the edge of his bunk. The barracks was still, except for the quiet breathing of tired young men. When the horn finally blared, the room exploded in motion, boots thudding, lockers clanging, voices breaking the hush. Jack stood and moved with deliberate calm. As he slid the photograph of Ellie into his jacket pocket, a voice cracked the quiet. "Well, well," Lance drawled from his bunk across the aisle. "The old man's still here. Thought you'd retire after yesterday's hike. Maybe write a poetry book about pine trees." A couple of half-hearted laughs followed. They sounded thin, forced, like damp matches trying to spark. Jack simply adjusted his duffel strap and walked past. Silence remained his sharpest weapon. The day's assignment greeted them in black marker on the outdoor board. Sandbag, relay, and wall circuits. A brutal test of speed and strength under weight. Sergeant Hargrove stood with arms folded, voice like gravel. "You will carry 50 pounds of sand across the field, scale the wall, and return. Repeat until told to stop. This isn't about speed alone. It's about whether your mind quits before your body." The recruits groaned softly. When the whistle blew, bodies lunged forward. Mud splashed from last night's brief rain. Jack hefted the sandbag onto his shoulder with smooth efficiency, his posture straight and breathing even. He moved like a man, measuring each muscle for endurance rather than spectacle. Lance darted ahead, muscles straining his face a mask of effort. He scaled the wall with a grunt and shouted back, "Keep up!" Grandpa Jack neither answered nor chased. He simply maintained the pace sandbag balanced like an extension of his body. By the third round, recruits were slowing. Some nearly dropped their loads. Lance's early sprint left him gasping sweat stinging his eyes. Yet Jack's rhythm never faltered. Sergeant Hargrove watched closely his pen, scratching a note each time Jack passed. The quiet Marine's steadiness carried more weight than any display of raw power. By lunch, humidity had thickened the air into something almost visible. The mess hall hummed with subdued voices. Jack took his usual corner seat, methodically eating oatmeal and eggs. Across the room, Lance sat with Vince and Rourke, shoulders still heaving from exertion. Their whispered conversation crackled with resentment. "He makes us look like idiots," Lance hissed. "Not a word out of him, and he's top 3 every time." "Maybe he's just that good," Vince offered weakly. That good Lance slammed his cup down, sloshing coffee. "He's hiding something. Nobody that age moves like that without a trick. Today we find out." Rourke glanced toward Jack's solitary table. "Careful, man. He never even breathes hard." "Maybe he's don't care," Lance cut him off. "I'll smoke him out." Their plotting carried just far enough for Jack to catch the edge of the words. He kept eating, eyes lowered, but a quiet tension settled in his chest. He had seen tempers like Lance's before, hot and brittle, dangerous when cornered. The afternoon drill involved paired navigation map reading and rapid team maneuvers across a forest course. Recruits were randomly assigned partners. By a twist of chance, or maybe quiet intention, Jack found Lance standing across from him when names were called. Lance's grin was tight. "Looks like we're teammates, Grandpa. Try not to slow me down." Sergeant Hargrove handed them a map and compass. Checkpoint in the North Woods. First team back wins. Go. They plunged into the dense pines. The forest floor smelled of wet moss and sap, muffling the sound of their boots. Jack held the compass steady, scanning the terrain. "This way," he said calmly, pointing northeast. Lance scoffed. "You sure map's tricky? Maybe the old eyes can't read it." "North-northeast," Jack repeated. Minutes passed in heavy silence, broken only by distant bird calls. Lance lagged slightly, muttering. At a narrow ravine, he suddenly shoved forward, grabbing the map. "You think you know everything because you're old, I'll lead." He veered left. Jack followed a few paces, then stopped. "That path dead ends in a swamp. We lose time." Lance spun, eyes flashing. "You don't get to give orders. You're not in charge here." Jack met his glare with steady calm. "I'm not giving orders. I'm reading the land." For a heartbeat, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then Lance cursed and tossed the map back. "Fine. Your funeral if we get lost." Jack led them on the correct heading, moving with the unhurried precision of a seasoned scout. They reached the checkpoint well ahead of the next team. The instructor noted their time with surprise. As they headed back, Lance's jaw tightened, pride smarting under the evidence. By evening, the heat had turned the barracks into a low-ceilinged oven. The day's exhaustion should have brought silence, but Lance's frustration finally boiled over. Jack sat on his bunk, cleaning his boots, when Lance approached with quick, hard steps. "You think you're some kind of legend?" Lance snapped voice, pitched to draw the attention of everyone in the room. "Just because you can run and read a compass." Jack looked up slowly. "I think we're all here to train. Don't play monk with me." Lance's face flushed. "You act like we're beneath you. What are you hiding?" That tattoo, a hush fell. Every recruit turned ears, straining. Jack stood calm and unhurried. The movement alone carried a quiet authority that stilled the air. He met Lance's furious eyes. "What I hide," he said evenly, "are things earned through silence. And nothing here will change that." Something in the steady voice, low measured, carrying an undercurrent of iron, made even Lance hesitate. but pride is a stubborn fire. He shoved Jack's shoulder. "Say that again, old man." The room tensed like a drawn bow. Jack didn't flinch. He simply stepped back half a pace enough to keep balance, but not enough to yield. "I don't fight allies," he said. Lance's hand twitched, as though to swing, then froze when Sergeant Hargrove's voice thundered from the doorway. "What is this?" The recruit snapped to attention. Lance's chest heaved. Jack remained stone still. Hargrove's eyes drilled into them both. "This is a training ground, not a barroom. You want to fight? I'll put you in the ring under my rules. Until then, stand down." Lance dropped his gaze, fists tight. "Yes, Sergeant." Hargrove turned to Jack. "Problem, Carter." "No problem," Sergeant Jack said quietly. The sergeant studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Good. Keep it that way." As he left, the tension drained like air from a punctured tire. Lance retreated to his bunk without another word. Later, when the barracks lights dimmed to a soft amber, Jack pulled out his notebook. "Ellie girl," he wrote today, "I remembered that patience is steel. People will test you, push you, try to crack the quiet. But strength isn't striking back. It's holding the ground of peace, so no one else has to fall." Through the narrow window, he could see the distant office of Commander Elena Graves. A light still burned there. She stood silhouetted motionless, as if the night itself had called her to remember. Jack closed the notebook, slid it beneath his pillow, and lay back. The day's storms had passed without a fight, but he knew something deeper was coming. The tattoo hidden beneath his shirt felt almost warm, like a truth waiting for the right moment to speak. Tomorrow, perhaps the past would finally begin to surface. The next morning cracked open with the metallic blare of the bugle and a streak of scarlet sunrise over Fort Darien. After yesterday's near fight, the barracks carried a strained silence. Boots hit the floorboards, and lockers clanged, but conversations were clipped and low, as if everyone sensed the air had shifted. Jack Carter moved with his usual quiet efficiency, sliding Ellie's photo into his jacket pocket, lacing boots in 3 practiced pulls. He nodded once to Maria Lopez as she passed. She returned a faint, knowing smile. Lance avoided Jack's eyes, jaw tight with unspent words. When the recruits assembled outside, the damp scent of pine mixed with oil from the nearby armory. A new sign on the board read, "Advanced Weapons and Live Fire Marksmanship." Sergeant Hargrove's voice cut through the cool morning. "Today we separate those who can talk soldier from those who are soldier. You'll strip clean, reassemble, and fire until you can do it blind. Safety and accuracy decide everything. Pair off and move." The words landed like a challenge. Inside the armory, long tables gleamed under fluorescent light. Rows of M4 rifles lay disassembled in neat sections. The smell of gun oil and cold steel carried Jack years back to tents in foreign deserts and makeshift camps beneath unfamiliar stars. Hargrove started the clock. Break down and rebuild. Fastest clean pass sets the bar. Around the room, metal clinked, recruits fumbling with pins and bolts. Jack worked without flourish, just pure, unbroken rhythm. Hands that had once stripped weapons under mortar fire now moved with unthinking certainty. Bolt carrier out, gas tube clean, springs checked, barrel cleared, reassembly as fluid as breath. 2 minutes and 30 seconds later, Jack locked the final pin and set the rifle upright with a quiet click. The room stilled. Others were barely halfway. Hargrove's whistle pierced the pause. Carter time. The assistant instructor called back. 2 minutes, 12 seconds. "Sergeant." A low ripple of surprise traveled through the ranks. Lance's jaw dropped. "No way." Hargrove crouched to inspect the rifle himself, running a practiced finger along each part. His eyebrows rose. Clean. Tight. Textbook. He looked at Jack, curiosity sharp in his eyes. "Where'd you learn to move like that Marine Corps maintenance?" Jack said evenly. "A while back." It was technically true and revealed nothing. The next test moved outside to the firing range, a wide stretch of packed earth flanked by berms. Paper silhouettes waited like silent witnesses under a brightening sun. 300 meters, Hargrove barked. Then 400, standing, kneeling, prone. No scopes. Recruits took their places. The smell of gunpowder sharpened the air. When the whistle blew, shots cracked in ragged rhythm. Some targets shredded at the edges, others barely grazed the scoring rings. Jack raised his rifle posture loose but balanced. He exhaled once long and slow and squeezed the trigger. The round punched the center of the target with a clean black hole. He shifted stance, fired again, another bullseye. By the time he lay prone for the 400-meter challenge, the range had grown quiet except for the measured pop of his shots. One after another, each bullet found its mark dead center. When the final whistle blew, an instructor walked the line of targets and stopped at Jack's lane. Every shot in the black. "That's exceptional." Sergeant Hargrove's eyes narrowed, but there was admiration now, not suspicion. "Shadow training?" he asked. Jack simply lowered the rifle and said, "Old habits die slow." Across the firing line, Lance lowered his own weapon, face flushed not from heat, but from the dawning realization that the man he had mocked was operating on an entirely different level. Word spread like wildfire through the ranks. During a brief water break, recruits who had once snickered now studied Jack with a different kind of silence, respect laced with curiosity. "Did you see those groups?" One hole every time someone whispered. "Special Forces has to be," another said. "Then why's he here with us?" Jack caught fragments of their murmurs, but kept his eyes on the horizon. A tension he knew could be as dangerous as hostility. Maria approached quietly, handing him a fresh canteen. "Your secret's getting thin," she said, a half smile easing her words. "Not a secret," Jack replied softly. "Just experience." She tilted her head. "Experience that could train half this base." He met her gaze but said nothing more. Some truths he believed needed silence to stay whole. The afternoon drill involved squad maneuvers through a wooded mock combat course. Lance maneuvered to end up in Jack's 4-person team. His earlier bravado had cooled into something sharper and quieter. As they advanced under simulated fire, blank rounds popping from hidden speakers, Jack's tactical mind surfaced. He read the terrain like a map etched on his palm, signaling silent hand commands that moved the squad smoothly from cover to cover. Twice he redirected them just before an automated turret released a burst of paint rounds. Each time they emerged untouched, while other squads stumbled through ambushes. By the end of the exercise, their squad held the best score of the day. Even Lance, chest heaving, couldn't hide a grudging respect. You did that without even looking at the markers," he said, wiping sweat. "Terrain tells you if you listen," Jack answered simply. For once, Lance had no retort. Twilight settled like smoke over the base, the sky streaked with molten orange. Back in the barracks, the usual banter was subdued. Recruits cleaned weapons and boots in thoughtful silence. Even Lance kept mostly to himself, throwing occasional glances at Jack that held more calculation than contempt. Jack sat on his bunk with his small notebook. The soft photograph of Ellie lay across his knee. He wrote carefully, each word like a breath. "Ellie girl," he penned today. "Your dad remembered what it means to do something well, because Liv's once depended on it. I stayed quiet, but sometimes actions speak so loud, the world has to listen. Remember, you don't have to shout to be heard. Let your work be your voice." He closed the notebook and let the day's images settle. The flash of the target hits the stillness of Maria's smile, the strange, new quiet in Lance's eyes. Across the darkening courtyard, a single window still glowed in the command building. Commander Elena Graves, stood silhouetted, her profile sharp against the light. She held a file in one hand, but wasn't reading. Her gaze lingered toward the barracks, as though the day's reports had confirmed something she had only half believed until now. Her mind replayed the name she had seen on the morning roster, Jack Carter, and the quick, troubling glimpse she'd caught days earlier of a black arrow curling across a muscled back. A memory from a past mission, one she had locked away, whispered at the edges of her thoughts. Could it be the same unit? Could he be one of them? Elena set the file down and turned off the light, but sleep would come slowly. Somewhere beyond the barracks walls, she sensed a story as deep and precise as the man himself, waiting to be uncovered. Jack lay back on his bunk, the night humming with crickets and faint machinery. Tomorrow would bring new drills and inevitably more questions. He felt the truth pressing closer, like a tide, that no matter how patient always finds shore. The base settled under a velvet night. After the long day of weapons drills and tactical maneuvers, silence lay heavy over Fort Darien, broken only by the distant hum of generators and the soft chorus of crickets beyond the pines. A thin moon hung low, throwing silver across the wet gravel. Inside the barracks, most recruits slept like stones. A few tossed and murmured in dreams of gunfire and shouted orders. Jack Carter lay awake on his bunk, eyes open to the dim rafters. The day's precision, the perfect shots. The fluid commands had stirred memories he usually kept locked behind a door of steel. He slipped the photograph of Ellie from his jacket pocket and held it up to the faint moonlight. Her gap-toothed grin and twinkling eyes seemed to shine back at him brighter than the stars. "Hey, kiddo," he whispered so softly, even the air barely caught it. "Your dad kept his promise again. Quiet strength like we talked about." The words eased a knot in his chest, but behind them lay the ache of an old promise to Ellie's mother, a vow spoken beside a hospital bed, far from the noise of war. The barracks air was too tight. Jack eased out the door, boots silent on the cold gravel. The night smelled of pine resin and damp earth. He walked toward the empty training field, where moonlight pooled in pale lakes between the obstacles. It felt like old deployments, the hush before dawn, the world holding its breath. He breathed deeply, the cool air steadying him. Each star above seemed like a marker of years survived and friends lost. Footsteps crunched behind him. He turned to see Maria Lopez approaching, her silhouette softened by the moon. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, pulling her jacket tighter. Jack shook his head with a small smile. Too many ghosts. She fell in beside him, their strides matching without effort. They walked in silence past the rope tower and the wall climb, both structures glowing faintly. Finally, Maria said, "You lead like someone who's led before. The way you move, people notice." "I just listen," Jack said. "Listening's a skill," she replied. "One a lot of soldiers never learn." The quiet stretched between them, not awkward, but gentle like the hush of an old chapel. They stopped near the rifle range now, an empty stretch of shadow. Maria sat on a low wooden bench and gestured for Jack to join. "I used to sit out here with my husband," she said softly. "Before his last deployment. He said silence tells you things words never will. After he died, I kept coming back. Thought maybe I'd hear him in the quiet." Jack's heart tightened. "I know that kind of quiet," he said. "The kind that remembers every voice you've lost." Maria studied his face. "Ellie's mom," Jack nodded. "Cancer. Fast. Quicker than the doctors thought. We had plans. A little farm outside Asheville, a porch swing. She made me promise to raise Ellie with courage, not bitterness." He exhaled. "Some days that promise is the only thing holding me steady." Maria's eyes softened, reflecting moonlight. "That's not weakness. That's love doing the heavy lifting." They sat with the weight of shared loss, two lives marked by war and fate, finding comfort in the simple fact of understanding. When they returned to the barracks, most of the recruits were still asleep, breathing slow and deep. Jack pulled his small notebook from beneath his pillow and began to write by the soft glow of a pen light. "Ellie girl," he wrote, "tonight I walked under stars that felt like a map of promises. Your mom's voice was in the silence telling me to keep steady. Remember, this courage is the quiet choice to love again when the world gives you reasons not to." He paused, letting the words settle. Outside, an owl hooted a low haunting sound that reminded him of long nights on desert watch. Across the room, Lance stirred, but didn't wake. The day's revelations had dulled his sharp edges. The recruits who had once laughed now slept with something like respect in the air, an invisible change that even dreams could not undo. Beyond the barracks, the command building stood dark, except for one office, where a single lamp glowed like a lighthouse. Commander Elena Graves leaned over a desk scattered with personnel files and field reports. In the stillness, she reviewed every note about Jack Carter, the flawless marksmanship, the unshakable discipline, the measured leadership that seemed to surface without effort, and the memory that had haunted her since the first day, the brief glimpse of a black eagle clutching a silver arrow etched into his back. Years earlier, in a remote operation known only to a handful of officers, she had fought alongside a special operations unit nicknamed Shadow Arrow. They had pulled her team out of an ambush that should have ended in silence and smoke. The unit had disbanded officially, their record sealed. But that tattoo... Elena sat back, heart-thudding. Could the quiet man sleeping across the yard be one of those ghosts from her past? A man she might owe her own life to. She switched off the lamp, but stayed by the window long after watching the dark barracks. She sensed that a moment of truth about Jack, about herself, was moving closer, as inevitable as the next dawn. Jack finally lay back, the notebook closed, Ellie's photo safe under the pillow. Through the thin wall, he heard the low hum of crickets and the sigh of wind moving through the pines. Sleep came but lightly. He dreamed of Ellie chasing fireflies under a Carolina sky, of his late wife, laughing softly on the porch swing they'd never built of missions that lived only as flashes of desert moon and coded radio calls. When the first hint of light crept over the horizon, he woke without needing the bugle. The air held a crisp edge, promising another day of tests, physical, tactical, and perhaps something deeper. He sat up, laced his boots, and whispered to the quiet room. One more day, one more promise kept. Outside, the sky brightened to a pale silver, like the shaft of an arrow cutting through night. Somewhere beyond the trees, Commander Graves was surely awake, two questions sharpening like blades. Jack felt it in his bones. The past he'd buried under years of patient silence was drawing nearer, as certain and unstoppable as sunrise. The dawn of the fifth day cracked open with a knife-edge clarity. The rain had washed the air clean overnight, leaving every pine needle glinting under a sky the color of burnished steel. When the bugle split the quiet at 500, Jack Carter was already awake, boots on the photograph of Ellie safely in his jacket pocket. He moved through the barracks with a quiet steadiness that no longer went unnoticed. Even the early risers had stopped teasing. They merely watched as he tightened each lace with the same care he might give to a promise. Lance glanced over from his bunk and looked quickly away. The jeer that once leapt so easily to his lips gone silent. Something in the air, respect, or maybe curiosity, had taken root where mockery used to live. Outside, the parade ground glittered with dew. Sergeant Hargrove stood near the weapons shed, a clipboard under one arm and a bullhorn in his hand. Today he barked, "We separate shooters from soldiers. You'll fire at 400 meters, standing, kneeling, and prone. No scopes, cold barrels. Wind stiff out of the west, so learn to read it." A murmur swept the ranks. 400 meters was a serious test. even for experienced marksmen. For green recruits, it was a mountain. Jack felt the old stillness settle over him, the calm that used to come in desert outposts when the first hint of dawn turned every shadow into a question. He checked his rifle like a craftsman greeting an old friend. Hargrove's eyes scanned the lineup, resting for a heartbeat on Jack. A brief nod approval or challenge was the only sign. The firing range stretched long and flat, its berms rising like silent sentries against the morning sky. Paper silhouettes waited at the far end, nearly invisible to the untrained eye. Wind tugged at the targets and carried the faint smell of oil and clay. Recruits took their places at evenly spaced stations. Lance set up 2 slots away from Jack, jaw tight. Maria Lopez claimed a spot near the center and shot Jack a brief, quiet smile of encouragement. At the whistle, the first relay began. Shots cracked, uneven and hurried. Some recruits flinched at the recoil. Others fired too quickly, scattering rounds wide of the scoring ring. Jack raised his rifle with a patience that slowed the world. He exhaled once long and controlled and let his finger tighten. Pop. The paper target jumped with a clean black hole dead center. Without looking up, he shifted stance, standing to kneeling to prone, each motion a practiced dance. Every shot followed the first into the same dark heart of the target. Beside him, an instructor lowered binoculars and muttered, "Textbook." Maybe better than textbook. By the time Hargrove blew the final whistle, Jack had placed every round in a group the size of a coffee cup. The range fell quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause. Hargrove strode down the line, inspecting targets. When he reached Jack's lane, he stopped. The center of the silhouette was one ragged hole. He turned, slowly scanning Jack's calm face. "You were supposed to aim," the sergeant said, finally, voice low. "Not perform magic." A ripple of subdued laughter followed, but it carried admiration, not mockery. Jack only inclined his head. "Old habits die slow, Sergeant." Something flickered in Hargrove's eyes, half suspicion, half respect. He made a long note on his clipboard. A few stations away, Lance lowered his rifle and stared at his own target. A spray of scattered hits, only 2 in the scoring ring. His jaw worked, as if chewing back words he couldn't swallow. After the live fire came tactical movement squads advancing by bounds while maintaining cover. Jack moved like water, signaling silent hand commands that kept his team ahead of schedule and out of sight lines. Even recruits who had barely spoken to him began to mirror his calm efficiency. Maria caught his eye during a brief pause behind a barricade. "You're making half of us better, just by breathing," she whispered with a small grin. Jack gave the faintest shrug. Teamwork remembers what words forget. By the time they rotated back to the observation berm, their squad held the highest accuracy and timing scores of the day. Lunch in the mess hall carried a different energy. The usual clatter of trays and chatter softened around Jack. Recruits who had mocked now watched with a respect that bordered on curiosity. Lance sat with Vince and Rourke, but barely spoke, stabbing at his food. His earlier swagger had cooled into something else, thought maybe, or grudging acceptance. Maria slid into the seat across from Jack with her tray. "They're starting to see what I saw on day 1, she said quietly. Jack lifted an eyebrow. "That you don't have to raise your voice to lead," she continued. "You just are a leader. The rest of us can feel it." Jack offered a faint smile, but said nothing. Praise he'd learned could become another kind of noise. By mid-afternoon, the talk around the base had taken on a different tone. Instead of jokes about grandpa, whispers of special ops and old-school Marine sniper floated through the ranks. Even seasoned instructors watched Jack with new calculation. That evening, as the barracks lights dimmed, Jack sat on his bunk with Ellie's photograph balanced on his palm. He opened his notebook and let the pen move. "Ellie girl," he wrote today, "I remembered why we keep our skills sharp, even when no one's watching. Quiet excellence changes rooms more than loud words ever could." Let your steady work be your voice. The right people will notice without you shouting once. He closed the notebook and listened to the soft rustle of recruits settling into sleep. Across the room, Lance lay awake, staring at the ceiling face, unreadable in the low light. Something had shifted behind those eyes. Across the dark courtyard, the command office glowed again. Commander Elena Graves stood at the window, her silhouette a dark cutout against the desk lamp. A file lay open in her hands, a personnel sheet from a long classified mission in Helmand Province. Shadow Arrow. The name still carried the weight of whispered gratitude and unsent letters. The report described an evacuation led by an unnamed Marine who had steered a hopeless operation to survival. The description of his build, his style, the quiet efficiency, each detail pressed against her memory like a fingerprint. Her mind replayed the first day's brief glimpse of the Black Eagle and Silver Arrow inked across a strong back. She didn't need a signature to know what she had seen. If she was right, the quiet man who now outshot and outmaneuvered every recruit under her command was one of the very soldiers who had once saved her life. Elena exhaled slowly, the realization both grounding and unsettling. Tomorrow she would speak to him, not as a commander to a recruit, but as someone who owed a debt that could never quite be repaid. Jack lay back on his bunk, unaware of the decision forming across the yard. Sleep came lightly. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and gunpowder, and above the dark barracks, the moon rode high, a pale witness to a truth that was almost ready to step into daylight. A restless wind rolled in from the north, overnight rattling the barracks windows and carrying the scent of rain-soaked pine. At 500, the bugle sliced through the chill. Jack Carter rose without hesitation, the familiar photograph of Ellie already warm in his palm. The silence in the room felt heavier than usual, as if everyone sensed that the day ahead would not unfold like the others. Lance sat on the edge of his bunk, eyes shadowed. The usual mockery in his posture was gone, replaced by a coiled tension. He watched Jack dress with quiet calculation, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Outside, low clouds smudged the horizon. The parade ground shone dark from last night's drizzle. Sergeant Hargrove stood waiting with a clipboard and a look that promised no ordinary training day. "Listen up," his gravelly voice barked across the yard. "Today is the Integrated Combat Readiness Course. Team maneuvers, full contact, sparring hand-to-hand tactics. You'll push harder, faster, and closer than before. And you'll do it until instinct leads, not thought." The recruits straightened. Even the wind seemed to pause. They began with close-quarter drills inside the combat gym. Mats covered the floor like a patchwork sea, slick under bare feet. Jack paired first with Maria Lopez. They circled each other in a silent rhythm, exchanging precise, measured strikes and defensive blocks. Maria grinned through controlled breaths. "You hold back even when you're perfect," she murmured. Jack gave a small shrug. Purpose of training is control, not damage. After 2 flawless takedowns and assists, they bumped forearms in quiet respect before the whistle sent them to new partners. Lance was waiting. Their eyes locked across the mat, and something unsaid passed between them. Challenge, maybe even a plea. The room held its breath. "Ready?" Carter Lance asked, voice low but sharp. "Always." Jack replied. The whistle shrieked. Lance lunged hard, a blur of fists and muscle. Jack sidestepped, redirecting the momentum so his opponent stumbled, but didn't fall. Again Lance charged, feinting high, then sweeping low. Jack pivoted calm as a tide, and neutralized the move with a soft but decisive counter. The room buzzed with quiet awe. Again, Lance barked. They circled, sweat dampening their shirts. On the third pass, Lance suddenly grabbed the front of Jack's faded olive t-shirt, yanking with a force meant to destabilize. The thin fabric tore with a harsh rip, the sound sharp as a rifle crack. Gasps rippled through the gym. The back of Jack's shirt gaped open, and moonlight from the high window spilled over the secret he had carried like a buried heartbeat. There it was, a black eagle, wings outstretched in silent flight, clutching a silver arrow that curved across the muscle of his back. The ink was deep and old, yet startlingly alive, the silver catching even the faintest light, like a blade unsheathed. For a moment the entire gym froze. No one moved, no one breathed. Sergeant Hargrove took an involuntary step forward, eyes narrowing. Whispers erupted along the walls. "Shadow arrow," someone said under their breath. "That can't be," another voice trailed off. The name traveled like an electric current. Commander Elena Graves, who had entered unnoticed moments before, stopped dead at the edge of the mat. The color drained from her face. Her pupils widened, as if a long-buried memory had just risen whole from the dark. She knew that emblem, knew it as intimately as the scar on her own shoulder. For years, she had told herself, the men of the Shadow Arrow unit were gone. Ghosts in sealed files, heroes who had disappeared after missions no one would ever publicly name. Yet here stood one of them, flesh and blood before her. Everyone hold Hargrove's voice cracked through the stunned silence. Lance released his grip, his breath sharp and uneven. He looked from the tattoo to Jack's face, confusion battling the adrenaline of the fight. Jack straightened calm, even as his shirt hung in tatters. His eyes met Elena's across the gym. For a long heartbeat, neither moved. Finally, she stepped forward. "Sergeant, stand down." Her voice was steady, but carried an undertone that made every recruit snap to attention. She stopped a few feet from Jack, searching his face. "Name," she said, though she already knew. "Jack Carter," he replied quietly. Her throat tightened. "Shadow Arrow, Operation Sundial, Helmand Province." The gym seemed to shrink around them. The younger soldiers looked from one to the other, struggling to connect the pieces. Jack inclined his head. "I was there." A sharp breath escaped Elena, part relief, part disbelief. "You saved an entire unit that night, including me." A murmur spread through the room like wind across dry grass. Lance found his voice rough with confusion. "You mean, you're one of those Black Ops guys, the ones we hear stories about?" Jack turned to him, his tone even. "I'm a father. I'm a Marine who served when needed. And I'm here for the same reason as you, to train and to serve again in a different way." Hargrove recovered enough to bark sparring's over. "Carter with me." Commander Graves, "Ma'am." Elena raised a hand. "Not yet, Sergeant. This man isn't a threat. He's a teacher standing in plain sight." Her words hung in the air, heavy with authority. Jack stooped to retrieve the torn shirt and slung it over one shoulder. "I never meant to make a scene," he said softly. "You didn't," Elena replied, her eyes bright with something beyond command. Gratitude, memory, perhaps even admiration. "You reminded us what quiet service looks like." When the gym finally released its collective breath, the recruits filed out in near silence. The usual banter was gone. A different respect, almost reverence, filled the space. Outside, clouds broke just enough to let sunlight fall in thin golden blades across the parade ground. Jack stepped into that light, feeling its unexpected warmth on his bare shoulders. Maria caught up with him, her face open with wonder. "Shadow Arrow," she whispered. "I've read about that unit. They were legends." "Legends are just people who stayed when it was hardest to stay," Jack said. Her eyes softened. "And now you're here training beside us." He offered a small, tired smile. "The mission changes, but the duty doesn't." Later in the quiet of the barracks, Jack opened his notebook. The photograph of Ellie waited like a steady heartbeat. "Ellie girl," he wrote today, "the past stepped into daylight. I didn't plan it, but maybe it was time. Remember this. We don't hide who we are out of shame. We stay quiet so that when the truth comes, it speaks for itself. And when it speaks, stand tall. He closed the book and set it beside his pillow, the air still humming from what had passed. Across the compound, Commander Elena Graves remained in her office long after the others had left. She stared at the dark sky through her window, replaying a night in Helmond, when a nameless Marine had guided her unit through a trap and saved every soul. That Marine now slept a few yards away, still carrying his oath like a hidden flame. Tomorrow, she knew the conversation could no longer wait. A low mist hung over Fort Darien at dawn, veiling the training field in pale silver. The usual clang of lockers and rumble of boots sounded softer, almost reverent, as if the base itself remembered yesterday's revelation. Jack Carter sat on his bunk with Ellie's photo in hand, feeling the shift. The barracks was quiet. No jokes, no barbs. Lance moved about wordlessly, his usual edge, replaced by something heavier and unspoken. Even Sergeant Hargrove's voice outside lacked its usual rasping bite when the bugle summoned them. They formed ranks on the parade ground under a sky streaked with pink. Commander Elena Graves stood waiting her posture, crisp eyes steady. She scanned the rows until they settled on Jack. A heartbeat passed, deliberate and charged, before she began. Today's schedule remains unchanged: combat drills and team tactics, but something changed yesterday that none of us can ignore. We witnessed excellence born of service and sacrifice. Let that remind us what this uniform is supposed to mean. Her gaze lingered on Jack once more, dismissed to drills. A current of silent respect moved through the formation as the squads broke away. The morning drills unfolded beneath an odd quiet. Even the thud of boots and the bark of commands felt muted, like background to something larger. Everywhere Jack went, he sensed eyes tracking him, not with suspicion now, but with an earnest curiosity. During a rope wall ascent, Maria Lopez caught his shoulder briefly. "The whole base is buzzing," she said between breaths. "Shadow Arrow. A rescue in Helmond, saving a trapped unit. They say you led it." Jack didn't break stride. "Rumors move faster than bullets," he replied, but a small smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. From the edge of the course, Commander Graves observed in silence, arms crossed. Her eyes followed Jack's movements, the way a seasoned tactician studies a map she already knows by heart. When the whistle ended, the session, she stepped forward. "Carter with me," she ordered, voice firm, yet strangely gentle. Jack wiped his palms on his fatigues and followed. They walked to the quiet of her office, a room of oak shelves and neat files. The blinds were half drawn, letting in slivers of late morning light. She closed the door behind them. For a moment, neither spoke. The soft tick of a wall clock marked the space between their breaths. "I knew that emblem the moment I saw it," Elena said finally. "Shadow Arrow, Operation Sundial. I was there when your unit saved mine. You let us out when every path was supposed to be closed." Jack held her gaze. "I remember. You were the lieutenant who refused to leave her wounded until everyone was accounted for." A faint smile touched her lips. "And you were the Marine who said, 'No one gets left behind, not tonight.'" I never forgot that voice, the memory's heat shimmering over desert rock, the crackle of encrypted radios. The smell of sand and cordite rose sharp and clear between them. "You disappeared after that mission," Elena continued. "No commendations, no after-action reports. Just gone." Jack exhaled slowly. "Our orders were to dissolve. The unit was classified record sealed. After my wife fell ill, I left the Corps to raise Ellie. I didn't plan to draw attention here. I only wanted to sharpen skills for civilian security work and to teach my daughter that strength doesn't have to be loud." Elena's eyes softened. "You've done more than that already. Yesterday reminded every recruit and every officer what quiet heroism looks like. Word of their meeting spread even without details. By lunch, the mess hall carried a subdued awe. Recruits who had once thrown taunts now nodded as Jack passed an unspoken salute in each glance. Lance approached Jack's table with hesitant steps. He stood awkwardly, tray in hand. "Mind if I sit?" Jack gestured to the seat across. Lance lowered himself, staring at his coffee. "About yesterday, I was out of line. Way out." He stopped struggling. "I thought you were just some stubborn old guy trying to prove something." "I didn't know." "You weren't supposed to know," Jack said gently. "It wasn't your fault." Lance looked up, eyes raw. "Still, I'm sorry." Jack extended a hand. After a long second, Lance gripped it firmly. Something like relief passed between them. Across the hall, Maria watched with a quiet smile. Respect, once forced, had become genuine. The afternoon brought team tactics on the wooded combat course. This time, Hargrove placed Jack at the center of the formation. No official titles, the sergeant said, but everyone here knows who should lead this run. Jack offered no speech. He simply moved. The recruits fell into rhythm around him as though the decision had always been obvious. Silent hand signals replaced shouted orders. Obstacles fell behind them in smooth succession. At the debriefing, Hargrove's usual gruffness gave way to a rare nod. That, he said, is what discipline looks like when it grows roots. The younger soldiers straightened with pride, as if the praise had touched them all. Twilight laid a golden hush over the base. Jack returned to the barracks and found Maria waiting on the wooden step, 2 mugs of steaming coffee in hand. She handed him one, and they sat side by side, watching the last light fade behind the pines. "You've changed this place," she said softly. "Even Lance walks differently now." Jack took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle. Sometimes the hardest fights end without noise, just people seeing each other differently. Maria turned toward him, her expression unreadable but warm. "And what about you? Do you ever think of coming back, leading again?" Jack considered the question as the first stars pierced the dark. "I think about Ellie first. Every decision starts there. But maybe there's a way to serve and still keep my promise to her." Maria's eyes held his for a long, quiet moment. "If anyone can balance both, it's you." Across the courtyard, Elena Graves stood by her office window, the lamp behind her casting a soft halo. She watched Jack and Maria beneath the growing night, their silhouettes framed by the glow of the barracks door. Her thoughts drifted to that night in Helmond, when a nameless Marine had appeared like a shadow and refused to leave anyone behind. Seeing him now alive and steady, she felt a gratitude that words could never fully carry. But gratitude wasn't all. Something deeper, a sense of destiny whispered that Jack's story at Fort Darien was only half told. She turned from the window and reached for a fresh sheet of paper, beginning a letter in her precise looping hand. A letter that might open a door to a new mission and a new kind of service. Later, when the barracks finally fell silent, Jack opened his small notebook under the soft glow of a penlight. "Ellie girl," he wrote today, "the world learned a part of my story I meant to keep hidden. But maybe some truths don't belong to just us. Maybe they belong to everyone who needs to remember that courage can be quiet and still change everything. I promise every choice I make begins with you." He slid the notebook beneath his pillow and lay back, the night air cool against his skin, where the torn shirt no longer covered the black eagle and silver arrow. Outside, the moon rode high over the quiet base. For the first time in years, Jack felt no need to guard the past. The world, he realized, had finally caught up with the man he had always been. The dawn after the revelation arrived soft and gold, brushing the parade ground in pale light. A gentle breeze carried the smell of wet pine and gun oil. Jack Carter stepped outside the barracks with the quiet certainty of a man who had made peace with the truth. For the first time in days, he felt no need to hide the black eagle and silver arrow inked across his back. The recruits gathered almost wordlessly. Their eyes followed Jack, but there was no mockery now, only the kind of attention reserved for someone they might one day hope to become. Lance gave a brief nod as Jack passed a silent acknowledgement of the handshake and apology from the day before. Sergeant Hargrove's voice cut the morning air strong, but no longer harsh. Today's final test is close quarters combat. You'll fight as if it matters, but you'll fight to learn. Control is key. Damage is failure. Remember that. The sergeant's gaze lingered on Jack. Carter, you're first on deck. The combat gym smelled of chalk and canvas. Sunlight leaked through high windows and dusty shafts. Around the edges, recruits formed a silent circle. Lance stood at the far side, already stretching his jaw, set in resolve. When the whistle blew, Jack entered the mat with unhurried grace. Lance followed shoulders, squared eyes steady. "Let's make this clean," Lance said quietly. Jack inclined his head. Clean and quick. The second whistle shrieked. Lance came forward with measured strikes, none of the reckless fury of their earlier encounters. Jack absorbed each move like water shaping itself to rock, countering with precision rather than force. A feint, a pivot, a controlled sweep, Lance hit the mat, but rolled back smoothly, grinning through exertion. "You're teaching even when you fight," he said between breaths. "That's the point," Jack replied. They circled again, the room silent, but for the whisper of bare feet on canvas. After several exchanges, Jack executed a flawless shoulder throw, pinning Lance gently but decisively. The whistle ended the bout. Sergeant Hargrove stepped forward, expression unreadable, until a rare smile cracked his weathered face. "Perfect control. Both of you. That's how soldiers fight with honor." Applause erupted, quiet at first, then louder, carrying something deeper than simple praise. As the circle broke, Commander Elena Graves entered the gym. She wore her formal dress, blues, the silver oak leaves on her shoulders gleaming. Conversation stopped instantly. She approached Jack, and to everyone's astonishment, raised her hand in a sharp Marine salute. "Jack Carter," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "This salute is not just from a commander. Years ago in a desert, half a world away, you saved my unit and my life. I owe you more than words. Today, in front of these recruits, I return that honor." The room stood frozen. Jack straightened, then returned the salute with quiet precision. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. A ripple of emotion moved through the recruits. For many, it was the first time they had witnessed respect, that deep soldier-to-soldier beyond rank or duty. When the commander stepped aside, Lance walked back onto the mat. His eyes shone with something Jack had not seen before, respect mixed with determination. "One more round," Lance said, not as a provocation, but a request. No anger this time, just to learn. Jack studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right." They squared off again. This time, Lance moved with a calm he had never shown, measured, deliberate. Jack countered with the same patient flow. They traded moves like partners in a dance, each strike answered with a controlled deflection. When Jack finally ended the bout with a graceful sweep, Lance landed softly and sat up with a grin. "That's the hardest I've worked, and the most I've learned ever." Jack extended a hand to help him up. Then it was worth every second. Around them, the recruits broke into applause, not the rowdy clapping of a spectacle, but the steady rhythm of understanding. After the session, Elena asked Jack to walk with her along the pine-lined path behind the gym. Birds called softly from the branches, and the ground was still damp from yesterday's rain. "You never sought recognition," she said, hands clasped behind her back. You could have parlayed your service into a high rank or a comfortable civilian career. Instead, you came here starting over. Jack smiled faintly. My mission now is Ellie. She deserves a father who keeps his word, not a man chasing medals. Elena stopped and faced him. There's an opening on the National Readiness Council, a role training homeland response teams. Flexible schedule, family time intact. Your experience could save lives again and still let you keep your promise to your daughter. I'd like to recommend you. Jack's brow furrowed. That's more than I expected. It isn't charity, she said quickly. It's necessity. We need what you carry, calm under pressure, the ability to lead without noise. Jack looked toward the horizon where morning light filtered through pine branches. If it lets me be the father I promised to be, I'll consider it. Thank you. Elena's eyes softened. It's I who should thank you. Some debts live beyond time or rank. Back at the mess hall, Maria slid into the seat opposite Jack with 2 mugs of coffee. Commander Graves just gave you an offer, didn't she? Jack raised an eyebrow. You hear everything. Maria grinned. This base has its own radar. You deserve it, you know. Whatever role she offered. He stirred the coffee, letting the steam rise between them. I'll decide with Ellie in mind. That's the mission that guides the rest. Maria nodded, eyes warm. That's why you lead without even trying. Everyone here feels it. Lance passed their table and stopped. Sir Jack, thank you, he said simply, for the fight for the lesson, and for showing me what real strength is. I won't forget it. Jack extended his hand. Make sure you pass it on. That's how strength keeps living. That night, the barracks hummed with a new kind of energy, quiet but alive. Recruits polished boots and wrote letters home with an uncommon focus. Jack sat on his bunk with his notebook open. The photograph of Ellie lay across the page like a blessing. Ellie girl, he wrote today, I saluted someone who once thought she saved me. Truth is, we saved each other. Remember, strength isn't about winning fights. It's about guiding others to stand taller than they did yesterday. If you can help someone else rise, you've already won. He paused, listening to the hush that had replaced days of jeers and doubt. This place is different now, he added, not because of noise or orders, but because of quiet courage. The same courage I see in you every day, even from miles away. He closed the notebook and slipped it under his pillow, heart steady. Across the yard, Commander Elena Graves stood at her office window again. But tonight, her stance was easy, the tension of unanswered questions gone. She watched the darkened barracks, knowing the change inside was permanent. Fort Darien had trained many soldiers, but this week it had witnessed something rarer, a lesson in dignity that no manual could teach. And at the center of it was a single dad who had once tried to stay invisible, now quietly shaping a generation of soldiers with nothing more than patience, precision, and an unshakable love for a little girl named Ellie. Morning sunlight spilled across Fort Darien like a slow tide of gold. After the revelations and reconciliations of the day before, the base felt different, lighter, quieter, as if every recruit had exhaled a long-held breath. Jack Carter stepped from the barracks with a calm that matched the bright sky. No one called him Grandpa anymore. No one dared. What followed him now was not mockery, but a quiet trail of nods and silent salutes. Maria Lopez fell in beside him on the way to the parade ground, the warmth of their easy friendship in every step. Hard to believe this is the same place we started in, she said, adjusting her canteen strap. Jack gave a small smile. People change when they know what they're standing next to. She tilted her head toward him, or who they're standing next to. The bugle's final note faded. Sergeant Hargrove strode to the front of the formation. His gravel voice, though as firm as ever, carried something new respect. Today is less about drills and more about understanding what service really means. We'll run a compressed field operation this afternoon, but first, Commander Graves has something to say. All eyes turned to the tall figure in blue stepping forward. Elena Graves let her gaze travel across the rows of soldiers before resting on Jack. The morning light caught the streak of silver in her dark hair. Yesterday, she began. You witnessed what discipline and sacrifice look like when they're woven into a single life. Staff Sergeant? She paused, correcting herself with a soft smile. Former Staff Sergeant Jack Carter served in a unit whose records remain sealed even now. I can attest from my own life that he saved more than a mission. He saved people who are standing here today. A hush rippled through the recruits. Elena continued, her voice steadier than ever. Jack did not ask for recognition. He came here to hone his skills and to keep a promise to his daughter. Yet by living out his values, patience, courage, humility, he has already given us a master class in leadership. She turned to Jack and offered a formal salute. On behalf of every life touched by your service, thank you. And on behalf of this command, I invite you to join our National Readiness Program as a senior field instructor. The choice is yours. For a long heartbeat, the parade ground stood completely still. Then, a quiet, almost reverent applause began spreading until every hand was clapping. Jack lowered his eyes briefly and returned the salute. Thank you, ma'am. I'll answer soon. First, I owe someone else my decision. He didn't need to explain who. At lunch, the mess hall buzzed with restrained excitement. Soldiers who had once kept their distance now drifted closer, asking thoughtful questions instead of trading jokes. Jack listened more than he spoke, giving each young recruit the same patient attention he gave Ellie when she described a school project. Lance approached with a tray and a tentative grin. Mind if I sit? Jack gestured to the seat. Pull up a chair. For a while they ate in companionable silence. Finally, Lance cleared his throat. I used to think strength meant being loud, winning every argument. Yesterday showed me how wrong I was. Jack met his eyes. Strength isn't about volume. It's about choosing what deserves your voice. Lance nodded, the simple sentence settling like an anchor. I'm grateful you stayed quiet long enough for me to learn that. Maria joined them with her own tray, smiling at the unusual trio. Look at us like an unexpected squad. Lance chuckled. A squad with the best teacher on base. Jack shook his head gently. Every soldier here has something to teach. I just had a head start on a few lessons. The afternoon exercise combined everything they'd trained for navigation, field communication, and stealth. Jack accepted the informal role of team lead, but framed every decision as a question, drawing out ideas from even the quietest recruits. Under his guidance, the squad flowed like a single organism, reading terrain and signals as if they had trained together for years. When they reached the final checkpoint with record time and perfect accuracy, Sergeant Hargrove couldn't hide a satisfied grin. That's not just execution, he said. That's trust in motion. Trust, that was the word that now defined Jack's presence at Fort Darien. After the debriefing and equipment checks, evening stretched soft and blue over the base. Jack found himself once again on the wooden step outside the barracks, watching the first stars appear. Maria joined him, a thermos of coffee in her hand. You've changed more lives in a week than some officers do in a career, she said. Jack took a slow sip. Sometimes the biggest change comes from the smallest circles. One recruit, one friend, one daughter. She smiled. Ellie must be proud. She keeps me honest, Jack said. Everything I do starts with her. Maria rested her elbow on her knee. Whatever you choose next, you'll do it for the right reasons. That's rare. They sat in comfortable silence until the barracks lights blinked on soft halos in the growing dark. Later, when the night deepened, Jack opened his notebook by the glow of his penlight. He placed Ellie's photograph on the open page, the familiar smile warming the cool air. "Ellie girl," he wrote, "today I stood before a whole company of soldiers and felt no need to hide. The commander thanked me for something I did long ago, but what matters is the promise I keep every day to raise you with courage that listens first and speaks later. Remember, leadership isn't a title. It's a quiet choice repeated until people trust the silence more than the noise." He paused, letting the words settle, then added, "If I take on a new mission, it will be because it helps keep you safe and teaches others to lead with love. That's the only measure that counts." He closed the notebook, sliding it beneath his pillow with care. Across the courtyard, Elena Graves remained in her office, the lamplight soft on her uniform. She reread the recommendation letter she had drafted, an invitation for Jack to help shape the nation's next generation of soldiers. She knew he might say yes, or he might choose a different path closer to home. Either way, the respect was already permanent. She looked out the window at the dim barracks and whispered half to herself, "Some men change the world by simply standing where they are." For the first time in years, she felt the rare comfort of knowing that a piece of unfinished history had come full circle. As night deepened, the base settled into a peace it had never known. Crickets sang under a sky bright with stars, and the quiet hum of duty done well filled every corridor. Jack drifted to sleep with Ellie's smile vivid in his mind, ready for whatever the next dawn on this base or beyond it might bring. The final morning at Fort Darien broke with a sunrise so vivid it seemed painted by hand ribbons of rose and amber, stretching across a sky freshly washed by rain. Mist drifted low over the training fields, glowing in the early light like breath from the earth itself. Jack Carter stood alone on the parade ground, long before the bugle boots planted in damp gravel breathing in the scent of pine and cold iron. Today was graduation day for the recruits. For most, it marked the end of a grueling boot camp. For Jack, it was more than a finish line. It was the quiet confirmation of every choice he'd made since the day he promised Ellie's mother that he would raise their daughter with courage and kindness above all else. He touched the worn photograph in his jacket pocket. Ellie's wide grin and missing tooth still warmed him, as if she were right there. "Almost home, kiddo," he whispered to the dawn. "Almost time to tell you everything." The bugle sounded, and the base came alive. Boots on gravel, murmurs of anticipation, the metallic clank of rifles cleaned to a shine. Recruits formed into crisp rows, their uniforms sharp and eyes bright. Where there had once been laughter at his expense, now there was a respectful hush as Jack stepped into line. Commander Elena Graves appeared with the color guard. The silver streak in her hair caught the rising sun as she called the company to attention. Her voice carried strength, but today it carried warmth as well. "Recruits," she began, "you have endured and grown. You've learned that discipline and courage are not about noise, but about steadiness. And thanks to one among you, we have all been reminded that service is a lifetime calling, not a single chapter." Every head turned, some subtly, some openly, toward Jack. Elena continued her eyes on him. Jack Carter's quiet excellence has elevated every soldier here. His example proves that true leadership isn't granted by rank or age. It is earned by character. We are better soldiers and better people because he trained alongside us. Applause swelled warm and sustained. Jack inclined his head in humble acknowledgement, the sound washing over him like sunlight through old pine. After the ceremony, Elena found him near the flagpole where the breeze played gently with the stars and stripes. "I wanted to speak with you before you go," she said, her tone a blend of formality and something far more personal. "The offer I mentioned still stands. The National Readiness Program needs instructors who can teach what you live precision, without ego courage, without noise. You could shape teams that respond to crises on U.S. soil and still keep the time you need for Ellie. Jack listened in silence, eyes on the flag as it snapped softly overhead. It's tempting, he admitted. But every decision starts with her. That's what makes you perfect for it, Elena said. You know where true duty lies, and that is exactly what the next generation needs to see. He met her gaze and for the first time allowed a small, open smile. I'll accept if we can design the schedule around Ellie's school and the life we're building. Elena extended her hand, a rare warmth, softening her military precision. We can, and we will. Welcome aboard, Jack, on your terms. Their handshake sealed more than a professional agreement. It felt like the quiet closing of a long circle begun years ago in a distant desert. The rest of the morning unfolded in a tapestry of small but powerful moments. Maria Lopez found Jack near the mess hall, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in hand. So big decisions, she asked with a knowing smile. Jack nodded. Looks like I'll keep teaching, just on a different scale. Maria's eyes shone. That's perfect. And selfishly, I'm glad you're staying connected. This place would feel emptier without you. Jack returned her smile. You've been a steady friend from day one. I won't forget that. Nearby, Lance approached with deliberate steps. The young recruit who once measured strength by noise now carried himself with quiet purpose. Sir, he began, then corrected himself. Jack, I wanted to say thank you. For everything. For the fights that weren't fights, and for showing me the kind of soldier I want to be. Jack clasped his shoulder firmly. Then carry that forward. Let your example teach the next person. That's how the chain keeps strong. Lance's answering nod held a confidence that needed no words. Later, when the ceremonies wound down and the recruits dispersed, Jack found a quiet corner near the edge of the pines and dialed a familiar number. The connection clicked, and Ellie's bright voice filled his ear. Daddy, she squealed. Did you win the big race? Jack laughed, a sound lighter than any he'd made in weeks. Something like that. I passed all the tests. Are you coming home now? Very soon, he said. But first, I have something to tell you. Your dad's going to help other soldiers learn how to keep people safe, kind of like teaching super helpers. And I can do it while still being home to read you bedtime stories. There was a long, thoughtful pause. Then Ellie said, Mom would like that. Jack swallowed the lump in his throat. I think so too, sweetheart. I think she'd be proud of us both. When the call ended, he sat for a long time with the phone resting in his palm, the pine-scented breeze carrying Ellie's voice like a blessing. As dusk settled, a soft celebration spread across the base, laughter around the fire pit, the smell of coffee and fresh bread from the mess hall. But Jack chose a quieter vantage point, the empty obstacle field, where moonlight pooled in silver patches. Maria joined him for a final walk. Strange, isn't it? She said, how a place can change its heartbeat in just days. Not strange, Jack replied. People find their better selves when they see someone else risk living that way first. They walked until the moon was high. No words were needed after that. Later in the barracks, for the last time, Jack opened his small notebook. The photograph of Ellie smiled up at him, steady and bright. Ellie girl, he wrote, tonight, I stand at the edge of something new. I'll teach others how to protect and serve, but I'll also be there to walk you to school and listen to every story you bring home. Remember this, always true strength is patient, quiet, and built on love. And love, my brave little one, is the greatest mission of all. He laid the notebook beside his pack, letting the ink dry like a gentle promise. Before sunrise, Jack stepped outside one final time. The flag on the pole rustled softly in the pre-dawn breeze. Across the compound, Elena's office light glowed faintly, an early start for a new alliance. Somewhere beyond those pines, Ellie was probably stirring, getting ready for school, waiting for her father's next call. The first light of day broke over the horizon, turning the mist to gold. Jack felt the steady beat of purpose in his chest. He was no longer a man trying to stay invisible. He was a father, a soldier, a teacher of quiet courage, ready to serve without losing the heart of the life he loved. He turned toward the barracks to shoulder his pack, the black eagle and silver arrow on his back, catching the sunrise like a seal of quiet victory. The road ahead was wide and bright, and for the first time in years, he walked into it without a shadow. Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from tonight? A small town, a busy city, maybe somewhere quiet in the countryside. It's always inspiring to see how these stories bring together friends from so many corners of the world. If Jack's quiet courage and the heart of this journey touched you, please consider subscribing to the channel and tapping the little bell. It's a simple way to stay close to the next stories of hope, healing, and everyday heroism that we share here. From my heart to yours, thank you for spending this time with us. Your presence and your kind comments make this community a place of real connection. Until the next story, take care, stay kind, and keep believing in the quiet strength of love.